The pilot took one look at her, and turned away. No greeting. No smile. Just cold dismissal. But what he didn't know, was that the woman he just disrespected wasn't just any passenger. She was the wife of the man who owned the jet in his entire career. And in less than 45 minutes, he'd be stripped of his title, his pride, and his future without her ever raising her voice. This is the story of how a single moment of arrogance turned into a career-ending disaster. Sometimes power doesn't come from shouting or demanding. Sometimes it comes from silence, measured, patient silence that speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. You won't believe how it ends, and the silence that destroyed everything he thought he controlled. Before we dive into this explosive tale of power, prejudice, and poetic justice, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if it were you? Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more real-world justice stories, and ring the bell so you never miss a twist. On a cold, wind-brushed tarmac at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, a sleek silver jet gleamed under the last hues of a fading sun. It was the kind of aircraft that whispered exclusivity and moved in a world far removed from commercial terminals and crowded boarding gates. This was where billionaires and executives flew in shadows, where status was currency and deference was expected. Standing at the base of the jet's polished aluminum steps was Captain Travis Monroe, a veteran pilot with a reputation for precision in the air and prejudice on the ground. His slate-gray uniform was pressed to perfection, pilot wings pinned squarely on his chest. His salt and pepper hair was combed immaculately back, and his narrowed hazel eyes scanned the horizon with obvious irritation. "She's late," Travis muttered under his breath, lips twitching with a faint sneer. Typical. A few crew members standing nearby exchanged brief glances but said nothing. They knew better. Captain Monroe was efficient, experienced, and utterly unapproachable. He flew for some of the world's wealthiest individuals and saw himself as a gatekeeper to their rarefied air. And though he never said it out loud, everyone could sense it. He believed he could spot who didn't belong before they ever set foot on his jet. In the distance, the low hum of an approaching engine broke the stillness. A black Cadillac Escalade, windows tinted jet black, slowed near the aircraft. The driver, clad in a dark tailored suit, stepped out and moved quickly to the rear door. From the car emerged Imani Reynolds. She was dressed impeccably, a navy wool coat draped over her shoulders, a subtle glimmer of silk showing beneath. But her power wasn't in the tailoring or the brand. It radiated from her posture, from the way she carried herself with deliberate elegance and quiet certainty. She didn't walk like someone who needed to prove anything. She walked like someone who had already proven everything. Her assistant, a petite woman named Rachel, followed closely behind, juggling a monogrammed carry-on and a sleek black leather portfolio. As they walked toward the jet, the sharp click of Imani's heels echoed crisply on the tarmac, punctuating the cool evening air. It was the only sound louder than the low murmur of idling engines. Captain Monroe squinted, watching her approach. His arms crossed tighter over his chest. His jaw stiffened. He didn't like this. Didn't like her type, as he often phrased it privately. And even though he said nothing, his body language said everything. Imani noticed it the moment she stepped within 20 feet. The slight narrowing of his eyes. The subtle straightening of his spine, like bracing for something unpleasant. The way he adjusted his stance as if preparing to ignore her completely. She'd seen it before. In boardrooms. In high-end retail stores. At investor luncheons. It was the look of someone who believed her presence needed justification. She had long since stopped trying to provide it. Still, she offered a pleasant smile as she approached. "Good evening," she said evenly, her voice soft but clear. Captain Monroe didn't respond. He didn't nod. Didn't smile. Didn't so much as look at her directly. Instead, he shifted slightly to the side, eyes glancing past her as if she hadn't spoken at all. Rachel, now at Imani's side, hesitated before speaking. "Captain Monroe," she said with careful politeness, "we're ready to board." He turned to the assistant with a flicker of disdain that he didn't bother to hide. Yes, he said shortly, his voice clipped. The flight is prepped. Without another word or glance, he spun on his heel and marched up the stairs into the cockpit, the clack of his shoes echoing off the metal steps like small hammers of arrogance. Imani blinked once, a small crease forming between her brows before smoothing out again just as quickly. She turned slightly to Rachel and said under her breath, "You saw that, didn't you?" Rachel looked uneasy. "I did. Do you want me to?" "No," Imani replied calmly. "There's no need. He's already told us who he is." There was no malice in her voice. No outrage. Just quiet clarity. Like someone reading an old story whose ending they already knew. Imani had dealt with men like Monroe her entire life. And she'd learned the same lesson again and again, they always told on themselves you just had to give them enough rope. With another polite smile for the crew waiting at the top of the steps, Imani ascended the stairs with unhurried grace. Rachel followed closely behind, casting a nervous glance toward the cockpit. Inside, the cabin was luxurious but tasteful. Cream-colored leather seats glistened under ambient LED lighting. Polished walnut panels lined the walls, and a small vase holding a white orchid sat neatly on a side table beside her seat. A chilled glass of sparkling water waited on a silver tray, condensation beading along its sides. Imani eased into one of the cushioned seats, crossing her legs slowly. She surveyed the space with practiced ease. It wasn't about the opulence, it was about the atmosphere. And tonight, it was charged with something unsaid. The flight attendant approached, her smile courteous but clearly forced. "Ms. Reynolds, will be departing shortly. Please let us know if there's anything you need." "Thank you," Imani replied with genuine warmth. As the engines rumbled softly outside, she pulled out her phone and answered a few messages, her face a picture of tranquility. Then the cockpit door swung open. Captain Monroe stepped out, scanning the cabin with a quick glance before speaking. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff," he said flatly. No acknowledgment of the passengers. No mention of Imani's name. Nothing. He retreated back into the cockpit like a shadow slinking away. Rachel leaned in again. "Do you want me to report that, Ms. Reynolds?" Imani took a sip of water, the glass cool against her fingers. "Not yet," she replied. "But, he's being openly disrespectful." "I know," Imani said, with a faint smile. "But patience, Rachel. Patience is how people like him show their full colors." Her voice wasn't bitter. Just certain. Calm. Rachel sat back, confused but quiet. Imani, on the other hand, remained still composed in a way that unnerved men like Captain Travis Monroe more than any shouting ever could. Because what they never understood, was that silence, when wielded with precision, was the sharpest sword of all. The private jet taxied toward the runway in near silence, save for the rhythmic hum of its twin engines and the occasional soft clink of glass as the flight attendants finalized their pre-departure checks. Inside the cabin, Imani Reynolds remained composed, her gaze fixed through the oval window beside her. Outside, the late evening sky over New Jersey had deepened to a rich indigo, the last rays of sunlight casting long shadows across the tarmac. It was beautiful, peaceful even, but the air inside the jet buzzed with an unspoken tension. Her assistant, Rachel, sat across from her, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She looked from the cockpit door to Imani, unsure what to do with the silence. "You know," Rachel finally said, voice low but tight, "he didn't even look at you when you said hello." Imani didn't turn her head. "I noticed," she replied, voice calm, as if commenting on the weather. "I just don't get it. That kind of attitude. From a pilot flying a jet like this?" Rachel muttered, fidgeting with the clasp of her tablet case. "I mean, he's acting like you don't belong here." "That's exactly how he feels," Imani said, finally glancing over. Rachel blinked. "So, we're just going to let that slide?" "Not slide," Imani replied, her voice softer now, but firm. "We wait. The words hung between them. Rachel opened her mouth to protest again but stopped herself. There was something in Imani's tone measured, precise that quieted her. It wasn't indifference. It was control. Outside, the engines roared to life as the jet turned into position. The powerful thrust pushed them gently into their seats as the aircraft lifted off the ground, slicing through the night sky with practiced grace. In the cockpit, Captain Travis Monroe gripped the yoke a bit tighter than necessary, his fingers flexing under the leather gloves he insisted on wearing, an old-school habit, much like the rest of him. He watched the controls with narrowed eyes but couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. Her. She was sitting right behind him. Calm. Unbothered. And that's what irked him the most. Women like Imani Reynolds didn't belong in this world, not in his mind, at least. He didn't care how expensive her coat looked or how confidently she carried herself. In Travis's world, power came with a certain look, a certain pedigree. And no amount of poise or silence could change what he already believed. She probably married rich, he muttered under his breath, not loud enough for anyone to hear but venomous all the same. Bought her way into this life. Beside him, the young co-pilot, Jeremy, glanced over uneasily but said nothing. He'd flown with Captain Monroe a few times before. Enough to know the man's mouth was almost as fast as his reflexes and far more dangerous. Jeremy kept his focus on the instruments, not wanting to be the next target of one of Monroe's bitter lectures. Back in the cabin, Rachel's discomfort had not abated. She stared at Imani, who now sat with a tablet in her lap, responding to a few final emails before locking the screen. Her posture remained perfect. Her face unreadable. Rachel leaned forward, whispering again. Should I at least file a report when we land? I mean, there are policies, right? Codes of conduct. Imani turned to her slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Not yet, she repeated. Let him speak. Let him act. Just give it time. Rachel frowned. But, why? Imani tilted her head slightly, eyes distant, as if watching something far beyond the cabin walls. Because people like Captain Monroe always show who they are if you give them space to feel untouchable. They always push too far. Every time. The jet soared higher, the city lights below melting into clusters of twinkling gold and silver. It was quiet up here, almost eerily so. A hush wrapped around the aircraft like silk. And in that silence, something else stirred. Power. True power wasn't loud. It didn't stomp or shout or demand attention. It waited. It watched. And it struck only when the other side had already doomed itself. In the cockpit, Travis couldn't stop glancing at the small monitor mounted just beside the throttle quadrant. The screen displayed a live camera feed of the cabin, a security measure, but one he often used for far more personal reasons. Imani appeared clearly on the screen, seated with impossible stillness. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't working anymore. She wasn't even speaking. She was just there. Calm. Travis hated it. She thinks she owns the place, he scoffed. Jeremy looked up again, hesitating before responding. Sir. I don't think she's trying to do anything, he said cautiously. Travis turned, his glare sharp. You're too green to get it. You see, this job used to mean something. It wasn't just a ride for rich kids and trophy wives. You had to earn your way up here. You had to prove something. Jeremy kept his eyes on the altitude readout, but his knuckles tightened on the edge of the console. Travis continued, voice rising just slightly. Now anyone with a black card thinks they belong up here. Think they're better than the crew flying them. He chuckled bitterly, unaware or unwilling to recognize the irony of his words. Because what Imani Reynolds had built in her life had nothing to do with inheritance, or marriage, or luck. She wasn't someone's plus one. She was the reason there was a plus one. In the cabin, Imani placed her tablet gently on the table and reached for her water again. The crystal stem glinted softly in the light as she took a slow sip. She glanced sideways at Rachel, who was now chewing her bottom lip anxiously. "Rachel," she said quietly. Her assistant perked up. "Yes. Do you remember what I told you when you first started working with me?" Rachel blinked, searching her memory. You said to always trust my instincts." Imani smiled faintly. "That's right. But I also told you don't ever let anyone rattle you. Don't give them the satisfaction." Rachel nodded slowly, her shoulders loosening a fraction. "Okay. I'm trying." "You're doing fine," Imani said warmly. But beneath the surface of her serene expression, her thoughts were sharp, measured, precise. She had seen this pattern before. Many times. And each time, the ending was the same. The louder they became, the more exposed they got. It never failed. As the jet leveled out at cruising altitude, Imani leaned back into her seat. Her hand remained relaxed on the armrest, her breathing steady. She didn't need to say a word. Because everything that mattered was already in motion. And Captain Travis Monroe had no idea just how close he was to orchestrating his own fall. At 39,000 feet above the east coast, the private jet cut through the atmosphere like a sleek silver arrow. Outside the windows, the night sky stretched endlessly, thick with stars and scattered moonlight. Inside, the cabin was hushed, tranquil at least on the surface. But peace is a delicate illusion. And on this flight, it was beginning to fracture. Captain Travis Monroe couldn't stop watching her. The cabin camera feed glowed faintly on the panel beside him. There she was, Imani Reynolds, sitting with that infuriating composure. Every time he looked, it was the same image, her legs crossed elegantly, a glass of sparkling water untouched on the table, her face unbothered. To him, it was arrogance. To her, it was just stillness. "She hasn't said a damn word," Travis muttered. His co-pilot, Jeremy, shifted in his seat. He knew better than to engage, but Monroe's muttering had turned from casual grumbling to a dangerous obsession. "Captain," Jeremy said carefully, "we're approaching smooth jetstream flow. Do you want me to make the cabin announcement?" Travis waved him off, his eyes locked on the feed. "No. I'll do it." Without warning, he pressed the intercom switch, his voice now broadcast throughout the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "even though there were only 2 passengers, this is your captain. We'll be maintaining our current altitude for the remainder of the flight. Due to potential turbulence, we ask that all passengers remain seated with seatbelts fastened. We thank you for your cooperation." It was standard enough, except it wasn't. His tone wasn't courteous. It wasn't professional. It was flat, mechanical, edged with a condescension so subtle only the truly perceptive would catch it. In the cabin, Rachel looked up immediately. "Was that really necessary?" she asked, eyes wide. Imani's lips pressed together in a faint line. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She just exhaled slowly. "He's trying to get under our skin," Rachel continued, her voice rising. "To make it seem like we're the ones being difficult." Imani set her glass down with deliberate calm. "He's setting his own trap," she murmured. Rachel turned to her. "What do you mean?" Imani leaned back. Her eyes didn't move from the speaker above them. "Men like him always reach too far. They don't know when to stop." In the cockpit, Travis sat back with a smug grin. "That'll remind her who's in charge," he said under his breath. Jeremy didn't respond. But inside, his discomfort grew. He looked at the instrument panel, at the flawless readouts. No turbulence. No threat. No reason to issue a warning. Travis wasn't flying the plane anymore, he was flying his ego. Jeremy glanced at him sideways. "Captain. I don't think that announcement was necessary." Travis's smile evaporated. His voice dropped, cold and clipped. "Watch your tone, Jeremy. You're here to assist, not critique." The younger pilot returned to his instruments, but his stomach churned. This wasn't about flying anymore. Back in the cabin, Imani closed her eyes briefly. Her mind wasn't tired, just precise. She had dealt with this kind of power play before. She'd seen men unravel in boardrooms, on stages, at negotiation tables, always in the same way. They couldn't handle silence. Couldn't process being met with grace instead of confrontation. They confused calm with weakness and overreacted, inevitably exposing themselves in the process. She opened her eyes again. The cabin crew moved quietly along the aisle, clearly sensing the shift in energy but unsure how to respond. No one said anything, but the tension had become visible. Felt. Rachel leaned in again. "Ms. Reynolds, why are you letting this continue? You shouldn't have to deal with this. You've built companies from nothing. You've spoken on panels, keynote summits. I've dealt with far worse," Imani said softly, her eyes still on the dark sky beyond the window. "This is just noise." Rachel looked down at her lap, her fingers curling tightly around her tablet. She wanted to fight. Wanted to say something. But something in Imani's calm told her, this wasn't the moment. The intercom clicked again. Only this time, there was no message. Only silence. A crackle. Then, nothing. Imani's head tilted slightly. She smiled barely. "He doesn't know what to say," she whispered. Rachel blinked. "What?" "The message reached him," Imani replied. In the cockpit, Travis sat frozen, his eyes locked on the control panel. A new notification blinked on his screen. "Incoming message, owner's office, priority, immediate." His breath caught in his throat. His palms began to sweat. He tapped the button. The message read, "From David Reynolds. Prepare for direct contact upon landing. Status review pending. Do not deviate from protocol. David Reynolds. Her husband. The man who owned the plane, the airline charter company, and 3 major investment firms on the East Coast. Travis swallowed hard. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how it went. He'd gotten away with worse before: microaggressions, icy stares, selective professionalism. No one ever called it out. No one with power ever cared. But this? He had pushed the wrong person too far. Jeremy noticed the shift immediately. "Captain? Is everything okay?" Travis flinched. "Focus on your instruments." "But that message." "I said focus." Back in the cabin, the hum of the engines filled the space again. Rachel looked up, nervous now. "Something's happening. Did you hear that?" Imani simply reached for her coat and draped it lightly over her lap. "Yes," she said. "It's beginning." The plane soared on through the dark sky, smooth and steady. But inside the jet, the real turbulence had just begun. And high above the world, Captain Travis Monroe was spiraling faster than even he could comprehend. Because while he believed silence was weakness, he was about to learn it could be the sharpest blade of all. The private jet sailed through the night sky, quiet as a whisper, its engines a low, rhythmic hum in the darkness. Inside, the cabin lights glowed softly, casting a warm ambience over white leather seats and polished walnut paneling. But despite the stillness, something charged buzzed beneath the surface, something sharp and volatile. Imani Reynolds sat unmoving, her gaze fixed on the moonlit clouds outside the window. From a distance, she looked regal, serene, elegant, composed. But beneath that stillness was clarity. She felt the shift. The moment where confidence becomes panic. Where control becomes a bluff. And where the mask of authority finally begins to slip. Across from her, Rachel couldn't hide her unease anymore. "Ms. Reynolds," she whispered, "is it just me, or is the air in here getting heavier?" Imani turned slightly, offering a half-smile. "It's not just you," she said. Back in the cockpit, Captain Travis Monroe sat stiffly, his eyes darting between the glowing instrument panel and the message still blinking on the comm screen. From owner's office. Prepare for direct contact upon landing. His fingers twitched. His breathing had become shallow. "Think," he muttered. "Think, think, think." Beside him, Jeremy the co-pilot was growing more concerned by the minute. "Captain," Jeremy said, cautious but firm. "I think we need to talk." Travis didn't look at him. "About what?" "You're not okay," Jeremy said carefully. "You're distracted. You haven't checked the NAV system in 10 minutes. That message clearly shook you." Travis whipped his head around, his voice cracking like a whip. "Don't tell me how to do my job." Jeremy blinked but didn't back down. "With respect, sir, I'm not. I'm trying to make sure we land this aircraft safely. For everyone on board including you." Travis leaned back in his seat, jaw tight, nostrils flaring. "She planned this," he hissed. "That woman, she baited me." Jeremy frowned. "What are you talking about?" Travis's eyes narrowed, his voice low and venomous. "She's been sitting back there, acting like she owns the damn place. Staring out the window like I don't exist. Like she's above me." Jeremy stared at him, stunned. "She hasn't done a thing. And that's the problem." Travis barked. "She doesn't have to. She's been mocking me with that silence. That smug calm. And now I'm the one getting messages from her husband." He sneered at the word. "David Reynolds. I bet he inherited every penny. Probably gave her a seat on this plane to make himself look progressive." Jeremy looked away, disgust beginning to seep into his features. "You don't know anything about them." "I know enough," Travis said, grinding his teeth. The intercom system crackled again. Jeremy turned toward it quickly. "Captain, what are you doing?" Travis didn't respond. He reached for the button. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the mic, his voice laced with fake politeness, "as we continue our journey, we'd like to remind you that the cabin will remain secure for your safety. Please do not attempt to contact the cockpit unless it is an emergency. Thank you for your understanding." Then he clicked off. Jeremy stared at him. "That's not protocol." "It is now," Travis said, smirking. In the cabin, Rachel gawked at the speaker. "Did he just imply we're a threat?" Imani said nothing. She sipped her water slowly, then set it down with a soft clink. Her eyes narrowed faintly. "He's unraveling," she whispered. Rachel leaned forward, whispering back. "Why isn't he being stopped?" "He will be." "How?" "We're in the sky." Imani turned to her, voice as even as glass. "He's forgotten that power isn't in altitude. It's in consequence." Rachel stared at her for a beat. Then nodded, almost involuntarily. Back in the cockpit, Travis tapped his fingers against the console, his mind spinning. "They're trying to replace me," he muttered. "After everything I've done." Jeremy clenched his jaw. "Captain, please. This isn't the time." Travis looked at him, his face flushed. "Do you know how long I've flown these planes?" 2 decades. I've piloted CEOs, senators, celebrities. And now I'm supposed to grovel to some tech millionaire's wife. She's not just his wife, Jeremy snapped before he could stop himself. She's the CEO of Reynolds Strategic Group. She's built 3 tech startups from scratch. She's on the board of the same aviation company that signs your paychecks. You think she's just riding coattails? She owns the coat. The cockpit went silent. Travis's face hardened. "You're either with me or against me," he said coldly. Jeremy looked back at the control panel. "I'm with the safety of this flight." For a moment, Travis said nothing. Then, slowly, he unbuckled his seat harness. "I'm going to speak with her," he said flatly. Jeremy's head snapped up. "Sir, no. That's highly unadvised. I'm the captain. That doesn't give you the right to intimidate passengers." Travis shot him a glare. "Watch the controls." He pushed open the cockpit door. The soft hum of the cabin dimmed as Travis Monroe stepped into the aisle. His presence was like a sudden gust of cold wind, sharp, jarring, and unwelcome. Imani didn't look up at first. She knew he was there. She could feel the weight of his stare, the electricity of his aggression wrapped in false civility. But she gave him nothing. When she finally lifted her gaze, it was slow. Controlled. Their eyes met. She was seated. He was standing. And yet, it was he who seemed smaller. "Is there something I can help you with, Captain?" she asked softly, her voice smooth as satin. He paused. For the first time in the entire flight, he looked uncertain. "I just came to check if everything is satisfactory," he said stiffly. Imani nodded once. "Everything is quite satisfactory. Thank you." The silence stretched. Her words were polite. But her tone? Her tone was devastating. He opened his mouth again, but she cut him off. "Unless," she added, her voice quiet but loaded, "you have something to say, Captain Monroe." He froze. The subtle shift in his expression, surprise, confusion, shame, lasted only a second before he turned sharply and stormed back to the cockpit. As the door closed behind him with a mechanical click, Rachel let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "What was that?" Imani turned back to the window. "The beginning of the end," she said. In the cockpit, Travis slammed the door shut behind him, his face pale. Jeremy didn't speak. He didn't have to. Travis knew. He had crossed a line. And even if he landed this jet flawlessly, there would be no coming back. Because what he failed to understand was that silence could be tactical. And Imani Reynolds? She had weaponized it with precision. Back inside the cockpit, the door clicked shut behind Captain Travis Monroe like the lid of a coffin ceiling. He stood still for a moment, his breath uneven, the adrenaline of the encounter with Imani Reynolds still pulsing through his veins. He clenched his jaw and returned to his seat stiffly, dropping into it like the weight of the flight had suddenly doubled. "Captain," Jeremy said cautiously, eyes on the instruments, "we're 30 miles from descent. Should I notify ATC and prep for landing procedures?" Monroe didn't respond immediately. His hands gripped the yoke tightly, knuckles pale. He stared blankly at the altitude reading, his mind spiraling deeper than any drop the aircraft had taken. "I'll handle it," he finally muttered. Jeremy nodded, hesitating. "She didn't say anything, did she?" he asked gently. Travis turned his head slowly. "What?" "Imani Reynolds. She didn't threaten you. She didn't even raise her voice. And yet," Jeremy paused. "You look like a man who just lost a fight." Travis glared. "Watch your tone." "I'm just saying," Jeremy replied, voice calm but unwavering, "whatever's happening in your head, it's not because of what she did. It's because of what you've done." Travis slammed a palm down on the throttle console. "You think this is about me?" Jeremy didn't flinch. "I think this has always been about you." Travis exhaled hard, shaking his head. "People like her walk onto jets like this and think they own the sky. Think they're above everyone because of their money and polished image. And then I get a message from her husband threatening my job." Jeremy frowned. "No one threatened you. That was a procedural message. You escalated this." Monroe looked away, his voice suddenly low and bitter. "I've flown for 20 years. No one ever talked to me like that. Not once." Jeremy replied quietly, "Maybe it's time someone did." The cockpit fell into an icy silence. Outside, the sky had deepened into pure black velvet. The glow of New York City lights shimmered faintly in the distance like spilled gold. The jet began its slow descent toward Teterboro Airport, gliding smoothly through the cool air. Back in the cabin, the tension was no longer subtle. It was thick and tangible, like a fog only the passengers and crew could feel. Rachel sat forward, eyes wide as she watched Imani return her seat to upright position. The cabin crew was already moving efficiently, preparing for landing. But Rachel couldn't stop glancing at the cockpit door. "He's losing it," she whispered. Imani nodded slightly. "He already has." Rachel swallowed. "Do you think he's dangerous?" "No," Imani said softly. "Just exposed." She folded her hands in her lap, her every movement calm, deliberate. "He was never in control," she added. "Not really. This kind of man builds his confidence like a house of cards. The moment one breath of accountability touches it, the whole thing comes crashing down." Outside, the landing lights illuminated the runway far below, and the cabin tilted gently as the aircraft aligned with the approach. In the cockpit, Monroe's breathing had become loud. Uneven. He stared ahead at the runway with tunnel vision, the approaching landing like a countdown to his reckoning. He hadn't noticed the sweat collecting on the back of his neck. Or the tremor in his fingers. Or Jeremy's quiet glances of concern. And then, it happened. The message. Another chime. Another blinking light on the internal screen. Incoming message, from David Reynolds. Status, immediate, team en route to plane. Prepare for debrief. Travis felt his stomach drop. His fingers clenched the yoke so tightly he thought it might snap. From the corner of his eye, he saw Jeremy reading the message. "They're here already?" Jeremy asked, astonished. Monroe didn't answer. Outside, on the runway below, a convoy of black SUVs had begun pulling up next to the designated hangar. Their headlights cut through the evening haze like spotlights, washing the tarmac in sterile white beams. Back in the cabin, Rachel looked through the window and gasped. "Oh my God, is that security?" Imani didn't flinch. "That's my husband's executive response team." Rachel turned to her. "What happens now?" Imani picked up her coat and draped it across her arm. "Now," she said softly. "Now we land." The aircraft touched down with smooth precision, the tires kissing the tarmac like silk. No bumps. No errors. Just silence and steel. But inside the cockpit, Captain Travis Monroe was crumbling. His hand hovered over the intercom switch. His lips parted. But no sound came out. He had nothing left to say. "Captain," Jeremy said. "They're on the ground. We've been instructed to taxi to the executive hangar." Monroe didn't respond. Jeremy reached for the control switch himself and took over. As the plane rolled slowly toward the hangar, the presence of the SUVs became undeniable. Sharp-suited men stood in quiet formation at the edge of the runway, faces unreadable, eyes fixed on the descending steps they would soon climb. In the cabin, the flight attendant stepped forward politely. "Ms. Reynolds," she said gently, "we've arrived." Imani stood gracefully, adjusting the lapel of her coat. Rachel stood as well but whispered, "Do you want me to stay with you?" Imani offered her a reassuring glance. "No need. Just watch." The aircraft came to a full stop. The engines quieted. And then, the door opened. Outside, under the bright floodlights, David Reynolds stepped forward. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. His face was calm, but there was no mistaking the weight of his presence. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence was enough. Behind him stood two men from his legal team, and one senior executive from the aviation board. Inside the cockpit, Monroe had gone ghost white. Jeremy turned to him slowly. "You should meet them outside." "I'm not going anywhere," Monroe hissed. They're here for you. I said I'm not moving. Jeremy opened his mouth to argue, but the knock on the cockpit door silenced both men. 3 firm, professional taps. A pause. Then again, this time louder. Jeremy looked toward the door. Captain, if you don't go out there, they'll come in. Monroe stood reluctantly, smoothing his disheveled uniform with hands that trembled. They won't fire me, he whispered, half to himself. I'm too experienced. I've been here too long. They need me. Jeremy didn't answer. Because it was already too late. The knock on the cockpit door came again, louder, sharper, and with finality. It wasn't just a courtesy anymore. It was a summons. Captain Travis Monroe stood motionless in front of it, sweat collecting at the back of his neck despite the cool air. His hand hovered over the latch like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Beside him, Jeremy sat stiffly in his seat, watching the unraveling with a mixture of tension and disbelief. They're not going away, Jeremy said calmly. And this isn't going to disappear. Travis clenched his jaw and yanked the door open. Beyond it, the soft cabin lights reflected off a figure standing near the rear of the aisle, Imani Reynolds, already on her feet. She looked composed, untouched by the chaos brewing on the other side of the plane. Her coat was draped neatly over her arm, her posture regal as ever. She didn't look at Travis. Not right away. She was watching the cabin stairs. And then, he arrived. David Reynolds stepped onto the plane with the quiet force of a tidal wave. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone spoke volumes. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a controlled gait. Dressed in a charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt, his collar pinched perfectly beneath a deep navy tie. His face was expressionless, but his eyes dark and sharp swept the cabin like a searchlight. Behind him followed 2 men in suits, legal counsel and a senior executive from Reynolds Aviation Holdings. Travis took a small step backward without realizing it. David moved directly toward Imani, stopping just before her. Imani, he said, voice low but warm. She offered him a gentle nod and the faintest smile. David. He leaned in and kissed her cheek before straightening and turning his attention forward toward the cockpit. Toward Travis. That's when the silence shifted. It became heavier. Expectant. David took 1 step forward. Captain Monroe. Travis straightened like a child caught sneaking candy from the jar. Sir, he said quickly, voice strained. I wasn't expecting you. David studied him for a beat, then spoke with precision. I imagine you weren't. Travis cleared his throat. There seems to have been a misunderstanding tonight. I assure you the flight was handled professionally and safely. If there's been any miscommunication, I'd be more than happy to. David cut him off. There's been no miscommunication, Captain. Travis's words fell dead in his throat. My team has already received a full report, David continued, his tone crisp, deliberate. Including witness statements, cabin audio logs, and real-time footage from the onboard surveillance. Travis swallowed hard. Sir, David's brow lifted. Would you like to continue speaking, Captain? Or should I? Travis froze, hands twitching at his sides. You refused to acknowledge a client when she greeted you, David continued, issued condescending announcements, violated flight conduct protocols, and left the cockpit mid-flight to engage a passenger unprofessionally, someone you clearly misjudged. He paused. Someone who, I might add, is not only my wife, but your direct superior on the Reynolds Aviation Board. Silence. The kind that screamed louder than any voice. I didn't know, Travis finally stammered. She never said anything. David stepped closer, voice lowering like a blade being unsheathed. She didn't need to say anything. That's the point, Captain. She gave you the benefit of the doubt. You failed. Repeatedly. Travis looked at the ground. His face had gone from pale to blotchy red, embarrassment warring with fear. I've been with this company for a long time. And that's exactly why this is happening now, David replied. Because time doesn't entitle you to mistreat people. Your career doesn't excuse your bias. You've been flying long enough to know better. The finality in his voice sent a chill through the cabin. David turned slightly and nodded to the two men behind him. Effective immediately, Captain Monroe, your contract with Reynolds Aviation Holdings is terminated. You are no longer permitted to operate any aircraft under our fleet or represent our brand in any capacity. My team will escort you off the plane and ensure your departure from the premises. Travis staggered a step backward, stunned. I need to speak with someone. HR, legal. They're already aware, David said coldly. You'll receive your formal documentation by the end of the day. You're done here. One of the suited men stepped forward and gestured toward the stairs. His face gave nothing away. Professional. Detached. But firm. Travis looked around the cabin, his eyes darting searching for someone, anyone who might offer him a lifeline. But there was only silence. Imani stood still. Rachel stood behind her, wide-eyed but silent. Jeremy remained in the cockpit doorway, arms crossed, no sympathy in his expression. There was no one left to defend him. Travis turned slowly and began walking toward the cabin door. Every step felt like a fall. When he reached the stairs, he paused then turned back. His mouth opened slightly, as if he might say something to Imani. A protest. An apology. A final jab. But the look on her face stopped him cold. It wasn't anger. It wasn't satisfaction. It was truth. Unapologetic. Unyielding. Quietly devastating. She said nothing. She didn't need to. And that silence was louder than anything he could have said. Travis Monroe descended the stairs and stepped into the cold air of the tarmac. The waiting black SUVs didn't offer him a ride. The lights didn't greet him. The world simply moved on. Inside the cabin, David turned back to his wife. Are you okay? Imani gave him a small nod. I'm fine. You were right on time. He smiled faintly. I waited for your call. I didn't make one, she said softly. David's eyebrows lifted. Imani's voice lowered. I didn't need to. I knew he'd fall apart all on his own. He chuckled, shaking his head. Still playing chess while they're learning checkers. Imani smiled, just a little. Rachel stepped forward. Ms. Reynolds, that was. I've never seen anyone. Imani turned to her gently. This is why we don't react emotionally when we're being tested, Rachel. This is why we wait. Let people write their own ending. All we have to do is turn the page. She turned to the steps. Shall we go? David extended his arm, and together, they exited the jet into the crisp night air. From the cabin, Rachel watched them walk toward the main terminal, framed by the floodlights on the runway. Side by side. Calm. Unshaken. Powerful. The jet stood quiet behind them. Empty of its poison. Full of its lesson. And somewhere in the dark, the echo of a career imploding faded into silence, drowned not by shouting, but by the one thing that Travis Monroe never saw coming. Grace. The cabin of the private jet had never felt so still. After the door closed and the echo of Captain Travis Monroe's heavy steps faded into the night, a calm settled over the interior. But it wasn't just the calm of a flight ended. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm when the air is thick with resolution, and the world seems to pause to absorb what just happened. Rachel stood in the aisle, frozen in place, her eyes lingering on the door as if it might swing open again. But it didn't. It never would, not for him. She turned slowly toward the back of the cabin where Imani Reynolds stood, adjusting the sleeves of her coat with deliberate grace. Her every move was composed, elegant yet unmistakably firm. There was no gloating. No sign of triumphalism. Just the unshakable quiet of a woman who had seen justice delivered without ever raising her voice. Rachel finally spoke, her voice a whisper. "Did you know this would happen?" Imani glanced up, her expression unreadable. "I knew who he was from the moment I saw him." "But how?" Rachel asked. "You didn't say anything. You didn't even file a complaint." "I didn't have to." Rachel stepped closer, still baffled. "You didn't do anything. And somehow, you brought him down." Imani turned to her, one brow lifted gently. "Exactly." Rachel blinked. "That's terrifying." A faint smile tugged at the edge of Imani's lips. "It's discipline." She walked toward her seat and gently retrieved her leather bag, slipping it over her shoulder. She smoothed her coat, took one final glance around the cabin, and then turned back toward Rachel. "Let me tell you something," Imani said, voice low and clear. "People like Travis Monroe. They don't crumble because someone shouts at them. They don't fall because someone confronts them. They collapse because their entire sense of power is built on the illusion of superiority." Rachel nodded slowly, taking it in. "They need to be respected," Imani continued. "Obeyed. Feared. And when you give them none of that, when you treat them with the same grace and courtesy you'd offer anyone, they panic. Because you're not playing their game. You're playing your own." Rachel looked at her with new understanding. "So you just waited for him to self-destruct?" "I didn't wait," Imani said softly. "I watched. I listened. And when the moment came, I didn't need to say a thing. He revealed himself." Rachel exhaled and looked toward the window. Outside, the floodlights still illuminated the sleek line of black SUVs where David Reynolds' team was finishing up their wrap-up on the tarmac. The hangar beyond was quiet now. Clean. Cold. Empty of arrogance. "I don't think I could have done what you did," Rachel admitted. Imani looked at her kindly. "You could. But it takes time. You learn to stop reacting to disrespect with emotion. You start recognizing it as insecurity wearing a uniform." Rachel smiled faintly. "Well, you make it look easy." Imani's eyes sparkled just slightly. "It's never easy. But it becomes instinct. And instinct will protect you longer than pride ever will." The soft hum of approaching footsteps turned their heads. David Reynolds re-entered the cabin. He nodded to the crew, then turned toward his wife. "We're clear," he said. Imani gave a small nod. "Good." Rachel watched as David moved beside her, slipping a hand gently behind her back, supportive, but not leading. A man who understood that the woman next to him didn't follow. She walked alongside. David turned to Rachel. "You did well tonight." Rachel looked surprised. "Me? I didn't do anything." "You supported her," David said. "That's more than most do." Rachel blushed slightly. "Thank you." Imani gave her assistant one last glance. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." Rachel smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Then, David and Imani descended the stairs and stepped onto the tarmac. The air was crisp, the sky blanketed in stars. The convoy of SUVs waited patiently, engines purring low as their doors opened in perfect unison. As they approached, the airport staff and executives standing nearby stepped aside in silence out of respect, not fear. And when Imani entered the vehicle with her husband, it wasn't as a passenger. It was as a force. Back inside the jet, Rachel finally sat down. For the first time since the flight began, she allowed herself to relax. She leaned back into the leather seat and stared at the soft overhead lights. What she had witnessed tonight wasn't just a confrontation. It was a masterclass. A masterclass in restraint, in quiet power, in how real leadership rarely needs to shout to be heard. She thought of the moment Travis Monroe had turned and tried to speak. The way Imani had looked at him. That silence, that exact moment, was the point everything changed. It wasn't rage that broke him. It was dignity. It was that look in Imani's eyes that said, "You are no longer worth my energy." Rachel opened her tablet and tapped out a note to herself. Not for anyone else. Not to post. Just for her. Never let disrespect provoke you into chaos. Let it expose itself. And when it does, walk away with grace. Far beyond the runway, back in the city lights, David and Imani sat in silence in the back seat of the black SUV. The car moved swiftly toward the helipad, where another aircraft awaited them. After a few quiet minutes, David spoke. "Do you ever get tired of being the most composed person in the room?" Imani smiled lightly, her gaze out the window. "Only when I'm pretending it's not exhausting." David chuckled. "You made it look effortless." "I'm sure it looked that way to everyone except me." "Still," he said, reaching for her hand, "I hope you know how proud I am of you." She turned to him, voice soft. "You don't have to say that." "I do," he replied. "Because the world doesn't always recognize that silence can be revolutionary." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "It can also be lonely." "Not tonight," he said. "Not ever again." The story of what happened on that jet would make its way quietly through the aviation industry. Not through tabloids or viral tweets. But through whisper networks. Through private memos. Through new employee onboarding. And it would serve as a cautionary tale. Not about the fall of a man. But about the rise of a standard. Because after that night, pilots were reminded that every passenger on board, regardless of their appearance, gender, or background, might just be the person who signs their paycheck, or writes their fate. But most importantly, the story served as a reminder of something far more timeless: real power doesn't have to roar. It simply waits for the world to catch up. Thank you for watching until the end of the story. In a noisy world, sometimes silence is the most powerful voice. If this story touches you, leave a comment, share your feelings, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel to accompany us on the next journey. We appreciate every view, every message from you, because every story only comes alive when someone listens. See you in the next video.